Hello, and welcome back to the video lecture series for Philosophy 119, Ethical Leadership, offered through the Pennsylvania State University. I'm Dr. William Behun. In today's session, I'd like to give a little bit of historical and biographical background material regarding John Stuart Mill and his text Utilitarianism, and then focus in on a particular key notion that differentiates Mill's utilitarianism from earlier forms such as that of Jeremy Bentham. Mill was actually the second generation of utilitarians in his family. His father, James Mill, had been a collaborator of Jeremy Bentham's. The younger Mill had been pressed into academia fairly early in life and very quickly made a name for himself as a thoughtful reinterpreter of Bentham's utilitarianism. He ultimately was more interested in the practical application of these ideas, however, and served in Parliament as MP from Westminster. Bentham used a system that he referred to as the hedonic calculus in order to evaluate the moral quality of any particular action. As strange as it may seem, he would apply a numeric value to the pleasure given by any aspect of the proposed action, and simply tally up the total pleasure or happiness created for all of those involved. This reduced pleasure to a simply quantitative function. The only difference between one pleasure and another was its intensity and duration. This subjected Bentham's system to one of the key criticisms of utilitarianism, that it is animalistic or bestial. If the only difference between pleasures is their intensity or duration, doesn't that encourage us to live like pigs, wallowing in slop? Wouldn't the most moral life then be one of non-stop indulgence of our own most basic pleasures, so long as those pleasures don't detract significantly from the pleasure of others? While this might seem attractive, it hardly meets the standard as a supreme principle of morality. Mill is particularly sensitive to this criticism and tries to rethink utilitarianism in such a way that it would no longer be subjected to it. He suggests that not only is there a quantitative difference between various kinds of pleasure, that is to say, a difference in their duration or intensity, but also that there are qualitative differences. Some pleasures are higher or more desirable than others, not simply because they're stronger or last longer, but because they are by their very nature better. I think most of us agree that as human beings, we wouldn't be really happy living like pigs, stuffing ourselves with food and wallowing in mud without any concern for anything else in the world is hardly our notion of an ideal existence. Somehow, while this might be appropriate for a pig, it just doesn't measure up for human beings. There are certain kinds of pleasures that aren't available to other kinds of animals that are available to human beings. It's been said that the average human being is still much happier than the most contented cow, and I think there's something to that. In order to make us truly happy, we must experience qualitatively superior kinds of pleasure, not just bodily or physical pleasure, or the happiness that comes from indulgence or laziness. Think of the pleasure that we derive from listening to a great piece of music, looking at an artistic masterpiece, completing a difficult or demanding task, having a great idea, or enjoying the company of those who share our interests, goals, and dreams. These kinds of pleasures seem to be fundamentally different from the pleasure that we experience when we lie in bed all day, or eat our fill of pizza, or even have sex. These are pleasures that we might attribute to the intellect, feelings, imagination, or quote-unquote higher values. These do seem to be uniquely human values. So how then do we evaluate what pleasures are higher and what pleasures are lower? Mill is characteristically practical in regards to this evaluation. We look to the people who have experienced both and see which ones they prefer. What seems to be key in this analysis is that there are some kinds of pleasure that are so fundamentally different that they render others insignificant, no matter how intense or long-lasting they may be. In fact, if there are uniquely human pleasures, we would generally not desire to have less than what we do now. Most of us would not trade our life, however difficult it may be at this time, for the life of a contented animal. But as higher beings, we also demand more for our happiness. It's easier to be a contented farm animal than it is to be a contented human being. And we're capable of much more acute suffering as well. Think of the pain that we suffer when a loved one dies. This spiritual or emotional pain is greater than any physical pain we could experience. And so while we seem to be less happy on the whole than our so-called lower animal friends, our pleasure and our happiness has greater value. We desire these higher pleasures for many reasons, not the least of which is simply pride. We don't want to think of ourselves debased to the level of a beast. We see ourselves as better than that. But the pursuit of these higher pleasures or happinesses is also consistent with our ideas of liberty or independence. Think of the description of the most basic human rights laid out in the Declaration of Independence: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is clearly not the happiness of an animal on a farm, but rather the happiness that is uniquely appropriate to a rational human being. These higher pleasures possess not worth or price, but dignity. When something possesses a price, it can be rightly exchanged for a sufficient quantity of some other good that also possesses a price. But when something has a dignity, it's beyond exchange. Its price is infinite. So while not dismissing the lower or bodily pleasures as worthless or undesirable, Mill asserts that our happiness is truly obtained through the pursuit of higher pleasures. Happiness in this sense can't be simply equated with contentment or freedom from suffering. So our moral duty consists not in simply seeking pleasure on the bodily level for its own sake, but rather of seeking those pleasures that are most appropriate to our human existence, and therefore those that will make us and those around us happiest.